Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel, and today I'm going to be taking a look at 10 of the most overhated metal bands of all time. 10 bands here that I just think get way too much hate from the metal community. All just my opinion, of course, but coming in at number 10, I'm going to go with Avenged Sevenfold. Now, to be honest, I'm not a big fan of their most recent album, Life is But a Dream, but with records in their catalog like The Stage, Nightmare, Hail to the King, and City of Evil, I don't know why they get so much hate, and the word poser gets thrown around a lot with this band, and I just don't get it. They're a band who have definitely made some odd decisions throughout their career, but have also released some of the best mainstream metal albums of the 21st century, and I think therein lies the biggest problem, is the word mainstream. Like a lot of bands on this list, oversaturation and overexposure is definitely a thing, but it doesn't take away from the great work that these bands have done to get to that point. Number 9, I'm going to go with Disturbed. It's funny because this past January I went to a Tool concert, and I remember before the show started, there were two guys sitting behind me who were just talking really loud. I wasn't eavesdropping on their conversation, but everyone in the section could hear what they were saying because they were just talking really loud. And they were talking about Disturbed. And pretty much they both agree that Disturbed was a band for, quote, nerds and, people who've really never heard good metal before, end quote. And of course I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that's basically the gist of what they had to say. And I don't get that sentiment at all. The band's best work might be behind them at this point, but albums like 10,000 Fists, Believe, and Immortalized are all 21st century metal essentials. Dave Draymond is a great vocalist, and it's important not to forget how central they were to the rise of nu metal in the early 2000s. So, for fans who write off Disturbed or their fan base, I don't think that's fair at all, and I think that their catalog definitely does speak for itself. Number 8, I'm going to go with Macabre, one of my personal favorite extreme metal bands of all time. Kind of a band that have been ostracized from the death metal community. A lot of people write them off as just being a gimmick band, which I think is ridiculous because they're one of those consistent and unique bands in all of extreme metal. They're wickedly underrated, and the band's uniqueness and creativity is really what drew them to me in the first place. They're more than a gimmick for sure, not to mention their drummer Dennis the Menace is one of those underrated drummers in all of death metal, extreme metal, whatever you want to classify them as, but he doesn't get half the credit that he deserves. And in terms of Macabre and where they really fall in terms of subgenre, they've kind of been cast aside, like I said, so they don't really fall into a specific category, but they're a band that are very unique and different. And to speak to their consistency a little bit more, they've had the same lineup since the 80s. There aren't a lot of bands like that, and I look at their catalog, I don't think they have a bad record. Sinister Slaughter is one of my personal favorite death metal, extreme metal albums of all time, so they're a great band that kind of get ostracized and cast aside from the death metal community, and I don't understand it. I think they're definitely more than a gimmick band and don't deserve half the hate that they get. Number 7, how about Creed? It's funny because Creed have caught so much hate over the years, and now that they're reuniting, people are coming crawling back, which is funny. And it happens a lot, I guess, with bands who get super big and popular super fast. They get dismissed as corporate rock or, whatever you want to call it. But Tremonti is an amazing guitarist, and I'd be interested in knowing, people who hate Creed, do they also hate Alter Bridge? Because Tremonti is an absolute beast in both of those bands, and so if you do like Alter Bridge, then tell me, is it more of a dislike for Scott Stapp? Because that I also never understood, because, he's also a killer lyricist who had a great voice too. So, in my opinion, Creed are just one of those bands that kind of got written off as corporate rock after a while. They blew up in popularity very quickly, but, are a fantastic band, and, definitely don't deserve that hate. But I guess that's par for the course with a lot of those very popular bands who blew up in popularity at, a very quick pace. Number 6, how about Slipknot? They're a band that I think get a lot of hate because it's another consequence of overexposure. A lot of metal fans have grown tired of Slipknot and Corey Taylor over the years, and I'll say this, I don't know where Slipknot are going next. I think firing Jay Weinberg was a questionable decision at best, but musically, I don't think the band have ever made a bad record up to this point, and like most groups, they've undergone a lot of changes both to their sound and their lineup, but I think have always made good to great records. Their early stuff are absolute nu metal essentials, and then somewhere along the way, they took a more commercial approach, which, important to remember, is the word commercial doesn't necessarily mean bad, not all the time. There are some exceptions, but commercial, some people think, oh, that's bad. It's not always bad. I think Slipknot are a good example of that. And then their most recent record was probably the most experimental album they made up to this point, and we'll see what's next. It's kind of unclear right now, but I definitely don't want them to turn into Kiss in the sense that, every other member is expendable, and, as long as Corey Taylor and Clown are there, then that's Slipknot as far as they're concerned, because that's not necessarily true, and usually when that happens, the music ends up suffering, but as of right now, they still have a very strong discography, and time will tell what comes next. Number 5, 6 Feet Under. Now, this one I kind of understand, because the hate for 6 Feet Under comes mostly out of a dislike for Chris Barnes' voice and his vocals that, definitely been on the decline for many years, but personally, I don't mind Chris Barnes' voice, and I think the Barnes era of Cannibal Corpse is probably my favorite era of the band. So then, of course, he moved on to 6 Feet Under, and, again, his vocals aren't what they used to be, right? They've been declining for many years, but just listen to those 90s albums with 6 Feet Under, especially, their work with Alan West. They lost something when Alan West left for sure, but I disagree with anyone who considers albums like Haunted, Alive and Dead, and Warpath as generic death metal. It's great stuff, and some fantastic work that he did outside of Cannibal Corpse. So for me, I understand the dislike for Chris Barnes' voice, especially these days, but to write off 6 Feet Under as a band, I just don't think is fair, because they have a lot of great albums to their name, and like I said before, their work with Alan West is probably the best stuff they ever did. Number 4, BABYMETAL. Like I was talking about with Macabre, some bands get falsely dismissed as, being a gimmick band, and BABYMETAL has been pushing back against those allegations from the start, and I just don't get it. How many great albums do they have to release before, they finally move away from that stigma? That's what I would like to know. I thought for sure their most recent album was going to, do just that, as it showed their most mature studio effort to date, but unfortunately BABYMETAL still remain one of metal's most criticized acts, and I really don't understand it, because they're a fantastic and talented band, and have shown time and time again that they're a lot more than just a gimmick. Speaking of some of metal's most criticized acts, coming in at number 3 here, we have Ghost. What's ridiculous to me is some people don't even consider Ghost to be a metal band. I mean, I never understood that. How can you listen to tracks like Mummy Dust or From the Pinnacle to the Pit and not consider them to be metal? As far as I'm concerned, Ghost are way heavy, and, they're a band that I think a lot of people consider to be poppy or radio rock, and you got a lot of metal elitists who get all bunched up debating what's metal and what's not. But mark my words, within the next 10 years, we're going to see Ghost playing stadiums, kind of at the level that Rammstein are right now, because they're getting bigger and better with every release here. Impera was a fantastic album, probably their best album to date, as far as I'm concerned. They continue to top themselves in the studio, and just an amazing band, continuing to be on the up and up here, and I think we're going to look back at Ghost as one of those bands that defined this current era of metal, decades later. So I think it's very important to remember, and I can't wait for their next album, because again, Impera was fantastic. Can't wait to hear what they follow it up with. What is it with so many popular 21st century metal bands catching hate from the metal community? I don't understand it. So coming in at number 2, we have Sabaton, another great band who, in my opinion, never made a bad record, who continue to get bigger and better, and also bring more eyes to power metal, but still get a lot of irrational hate from metal fans. Some people say all Sabaton sounds the same, but as far as I'm concerned, if it's not broken, don't fix it. I thought Great War would have been, their best album ever. There was nothing that's going to top it, but then they released The War to End All Wars, which is possibly their best up to this point. Probably right up there with Carolus Rex for me, and so, they're a band that, again, are better and better in the studio with every release, and continue to top themselves, which is awesome, and so, when it comes to a band like Sabaton that get written off as being, too commercially popular for power metal, just remember that it's okay to like bands who might be commercially favored, or even considered gateway bands by some, because that doesn't make you a poser. That word poser is so ridiculous. Good music is good music, regardless of how popular a band is or isn't. So I think we need to normalize that and get over the, they're popular, so that they're not good anymore. We can't be fans of them anymore. That kind of stigma, because I've never understood it to begin with, and it's unfair, especially to a band like Sabaton, who, yeah, they're popular, but they're popular for a reason. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Metallica. Now, I could dedicate an entire upload to why Metallica gets so much hate and why I don't necessarily agree with it at all, but there are a bunch of Metallica sucks crowds out there. There are the crowd that feels that they haven't done anything good since And Justice for All. There's the crowd that still calls them sellouts for making the Black Album, and then having the nerve to cut their hair. Oh my god. And then you have the crowd that, looks at their new stuff, like 72 Seasons and Hardwired, and really writes it off without even listening to it. And, of course, albums like, that, their new stuff, is not on the level of records like Ride the Lightning or Master of Puppets, but, still really solid in my opinion. And so, people who write it off, probably haven't even heard it. And so, there's also a crowd of people who still hold a grudge against Metallica, in particular Lars, for the whole Napster thing. And speaking of Napster, the way that I look at it is music was moving into the digital age, and moving into the digital age rapidly. And so somebody had to be the bad guy in that situation and set boundaries for what was and what wasn't acceptable, and what bands were going to allow, what they weren't going to allow. And so if Lars became the poster boy for that, then, listen, so be it. But I think 20 years later, he was still right. And so maybe I'm a bit biased to Metallica, because they're one of my favorite bands of all time, and I don't think they have a bad album. Even Saint Anger, I think, has its moments. But, over the years, I feel like there's no band has received more irrational hate for a multitude of different ridiculous reasons than Metallica. So in my opinion, they are the most overhated metal band of all time, and coming in at number 1 on this list, have to go with Metallica. They're the biggest metal band in the world, and so I guess with that comes a lot of unwarranted criticism. So that wraps up this rant video here, counting down 10 of the most overhated metal bands of all time, which you guys can see right over here. If you enjoyed this video, or if you agree with me, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the bell for notifications so you don't miss a new upload, and please let me know down in the comment section below your thoughts on my picks, and also, what are some other overhated bands that you enjoy that some other people might not? I definitely want to hear from you. And until next time, it's the CD guy, Johnny Z, signing off. Take care, everybody.